Good afternoon, and welcome. I hope you guys have enjoyed your time here at Build, and that you find Windows 8 as exciting as we do. Personally, this has been a big weight off my chest, because it's the first time I've been able to talk to you guys about what we've been doing in Windows 8 and all the hard work my team's been putting in. My name is Chapala Street, and one of the features that I own is text. I came to Microsoft about 3.5 years ago, straight out of college, and when my manager told me that I'd be working on text, I completely assumed that he thought I was an idiot, because it's text. I mean, this is something that computers have done for about 20 years. So there can't really be anything hard left to solve in the area of text. But I quickly came to find that there's things that aren't quite as easy as they should be, and things don't work like we may expect them to. So I've spent my time in XAML, first on WPF, then on Silverlight, and now on Windows 8 XAML, trying to make the experience with text easier for you guys. Our agenda today is pretty simple. We'll first talk about the new features in text, and use that as a segue to talk about how we've simplified the printing experience in Windows 8 in the XAML framework. When you leave here today, you should have examples of how to use these new text features and how to integrate your XAML app with the Windows 8 print charm. I have a fair amount of content, but I'll try and get through it pretty quickly, and then after that, feel free to come up to one of the microphones and ask questions, or just come right up to the stage and we can have a more personal discussion. So, before I jump into the new things that we've added to the Windows 8 XAML tech stack, I'd like to set the stage and just say that if you've used text in a XAML framework, all these text controls should be very familiar to you. So if you want to let a user edit plain text, use a text box control. If you want to let a user securely enter a password, use a password box control. If you know that you just want to display text as content to the user and they're never going to edit it, use a text block control. So the Windows 8 XAML tech stack is like past tech stacks in that it's pay for play. And there's a division between editable controls and non-editable controls. Editable controls have an editing infrastructure, so if you know a user's not going to edit text, use a non-editable control, and you should see a small perf gain by not incurring the cost of the editing infrastructure. The first major investment that you need to know about in Windows 8 XAML is touch text selection. So over past releases of Windows, users have become very adept at selecting and interacting with text via the mouse. However, a mouse doesn't really translate to a touch environment very well. For example, the device that you use to select text in a touch environment is your finger and not the mouse. And your finger has a lot less precision than a mouse, so the whole text selection model kind of falls apart. So we've reimagined the model of text selection in the context of the Windows 8 touch language and come up with a completely new text selection model designed for touch. This text selection model has been built into all of our text controls for free, so you don't have to do anything to get it. And more importantly, this selection model is shared by all text controls in all frameworks for Metro-style apps. So once a user learns how to select text in one Metro-style app, they know how to select text in all Metro-style apps. Another nice feature we've added around selection is context menus. In past XAML frameworks, we forced our developers to write context menus for commanding text. That's things like cut, copy, and paste. However, in Windows 8, we've added these context menus for you for free. One thing to note is that text selection's off by default for text block, because we imagine that you'll use a text block in scenarios where users don't necessarily want to interact with the text. So if they tap on this element, we don't want to be showing the UI for text selection. However, you can easily enable it on these elements if you have a scenario that you think calls for it with one property, the isTextSelectionEnabled property, which is Boolean. Set it to true, and you get text selection on text blocks. The second major area of investment is integration with the soft keyboard. Screen real estate is a very valuable resource, especially when you have smaller devices. And we understand that the soft keyboard takes up a large portion of that space. So users need a consistent way to get the soft keyboard up when they want to enter text, but they also need to have confidence that they can get rid of the soft keyboard when they don't want it taking up their screen real estate. So for that reason, we've gone with an implicit invocation model for the soft keyboard. When you tap on an editable text control, the soft keyboard comes up. When you move away from the editable text control, the soft keyboard goes down. It's important to note that there's no APIs that you as a developer can call to show or hide the soft keyboard. This is an intentional decision that we made across all Metro-style apps because we want users to have a consistent experience between one app to another of how to invoke and dismiss the soft keyboard. The first feature that I'd like to talk about is spell checking. We've added the property is spell check enabled to all of our editable text controls. And this just, when it's set to true, allows our text controls to do spell checking. And personally, this is one of my favorite features because between you and me, my spelling is just terrible. If it wasn't for Word and the little red squiggly, I would have never made it out of college. So we now give you the power of spell checking to expose to your users in your apps through an easy property. What's even better is that the spell checking feature is language specific for free. So our controls will look at the layout of the keyboard that the user's typing it with and then choose a dictionary to do spell checking with accordingly. So if the user is using an English keyboard, then we'll use an English dictionary for spell checking. And if the user is using a Spanish keyboard, we'll use a Spanish dictionary for spell checking. And this is all for free. Spell checking is off by default on text box, but it can easily be enabled with this is spell check enabled property. We've also added text prediction for our touch users. Our soft keyboard has a lot of great logic in it to help it determine which character a user pressed or meant to press. However, we understand that typing on a soft keyboard is implicitly slower than typing on a hard keyboard. So text prediction allows our controls to watch what characters have been pressed and then make a prediction of the word that a user is typing and show it to the user so they can tap on it and quickly enter that word. Like spell checking, it's language specific for free. So our controls will look at the keyboard that you're using to type text with and then give predictions specific to that language. And I kind of hinted at this, and when I said this is a feature for our touch users, but it's only when using the soft keyboard. We are trying to get out of using Chrome for lots of things. So in Metro-style applications, we want it just clean and clear. And so if you're using touch, you get this. If you're not using touch, you don't get this. For regular text box, once a user's added text, we've added a button to simply clear the text so they don't have to tab to the field, Control A, select everything, and then delete it. And we've added a standard letting model to the XAML text stack. In past text stacks, we've had multiple ways of doing letting. If you're not familiar with the term letting, it refers to the amount of space in between two lines of text. And in past XAML text stacks, there's 2 or 3 different ways to do that. However, they're not necessarily what a lot of publishing industries use. And so we've added a baseline to baseline letting model. And all baseline to baseline letting does is it places the first line of text at the very top of the text control. And then each line after that is placed a developer specified amount of space from the baseline of the previous line. On our password box, we've added a password reveal button. This helps increase users' confidence when entering passwords so that they know they've entered the password that they think they've entered. When you press and hold on the password reveal button, it shows the user the text they've entered. So let's take a look at some of these new features that we've added live. So here we have 3 XAML text controls. The one on the far left is a read-only text block. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on a word. And that's going to highlight the word and then bring up text selection grippers. When I drag these grippers around, that's the method of extending selection. So I'm going to grab the right gripper and select some text. Now that I have my full selection that I want, I can tap on either of the grippers or the selection itself to bring up a context menu. And I'll just copy that text. Now, I'll paste that text into a text box. As I tapped on the middle text box, it realized that I now gave focus to an editable text control, and the soft keyboard came up because, as a user, I'll want to enter some text. I also have the gripper for the caret, which I can tap on to bring up the context menu and paste. If I take focus away from the editable text box, the soft keyboard goes away. If I click back, you see it again. The far right text box has text spell checking and text prediction enabled. So right now I'm using an English keyboard, and I'll just type a quick sentence. Today. And as you see, as I started typing, I got a suggestion for today. Luckily, that's the word I wanted. So I'll tap on it. It will be entered into the text control. And then continue typing is Thursday. I spelled everything correctly, so you see no spelling errors. If I added some gibberish, it'd get a little red underlined squiggly, which we're all used to, and users know means I've misspelled a word. I could also type this text in Spanish. So, hoy es jueves, and since we're entering text with the English keyboard, we're spell checking in English, and those are misspelled words. If I then switch my keyboard to Spanish and type my original text, it all gets marked as misspelled because obviously this is not Spanish text, and since we're using a Spanish keyboard, we're using a Spanish dictionary to do the spell checking. If I then write my Spanish sentence, it not only gives me text prediction in Spanish, but it also does spell checking in Spanish. And all this comes for free right out of the box. So let's take a quick look at the code for this. And if you're familiar with XAML, this should be very familiar to you. So we have all of our content's in a grid. If you expand the grid, you see that we've declared a few columns. And I've placed each text control in a stack panel with a text block which tells you what kind of control is in this stack panel. And so this is standard XAML that runs in Silverlight WPF and just works in Windows 8. The two changes that we've made for Windows 8 is the is text prediction enabled property, and we've set that to true, and is spell check enabled property, and we've also set that to true, and that's on the far right text box in that demo. So we've also added some new elements. One of the new elements is a rich text block. This is very similar to a text block, except the content model is a little more rich. So for example, you can add a hyperlink or any inline UI element. In the bottom right picture, there's an image inserted into the text. That's a XAML image, but it could be any other UI element. So that could be a button, or it could be a control that you've written. Like all of our other text controls, it's designed for touch text selection, and it shares many of the same properties as a text block. If you were to place this rich text block on a page and give it some content, the content may overflow the bounds of the text block, and it just simply get clipped when rendered. Figuring out what text has been clipped and trying to then place that in another element on the screen is a really hard problem right now. So what we did is we added another element called a rich text block overflow, and you can link this to a rich text block via the overflow content target property, and then any extra content from the rich text block will automatically flow into the rich text block overflow. Linking these elements together in such a way, our team calls creating a chain of linked text containers. And linked text containers allow you to do a lot of interesting scenarios. For example, you could create a column layout with this. In this example, the first column is a rich text block, and each subsequent column is a rich text block overflow element, which is linked to the previous column. You could also wrap text around an image and create tight wrap. In this example, the first line is a rich text block, and each subsequent line is a rich text block overflow that's linked to the previous line. So let's cover a few ground rules of linked text containers so that you can go out and use these in your apps today. The first rule is that a rich text block always starts a chain of linked text containers. You can then, link a rich text block overflow element to the rich text block or any other rich text block overflow with no limit. Additionally, rich text blocks and rich text block overflow elements are like any other XAML element. They need to be in the visual tree to go through layout. And if they don't go through layout, they won't measure their text, and text won't flow from one element to another. So just keep that in the back of your minds when you're creating chains of linked text containers. The way you should really think about a rich text block overflow element is that it's just a viewport to the content of the rich text block. So you can set properties like size and position and move this viewport around a XAML scene, but you can't control properties like font family, the foreground color of the text, the font size. Those are all properties tied to the content, and the content is owned by the rich text block element. So if you want to change one of those properties, go to the parent rich text block that starts the chain of linked text containers and change that property there, and then it'll be reflected throughout the whole chain. There are two properties that you should know about on rich text block overflow elements. One is the overflow content target property, which I mentioned earlier. This says what element any extra content will flow into, and has overflow content. This says whether this element actually has content to overflow into another element. So let's take a look at that first example I showed you of creating a column layout with rich text blocks. Oh. So you saw a picture of this when I first motivated why linked text containers are useful in various scenarios. And so one thing to note is that, like all of our text controls, these have touch text selection built into them. There's a little bug that shows the selection being rendered raggedy, but this text really flows from one element to another, and that reflects in selection. So I can select over any element, and the selection just grows as you would expect. The code for creating this is similarly simple. Here, all of our stuff is contained in a grid. We've created some row and column definitions like you would for any grid. We've added a text block at the very top, which contains the name of the fake newspaper that we have. There's a rectangle to do a little divider, and an image source for the image. Here's our chain of linked text containers, and as you can see, it's just 3 simple XAML elements that have been added to the page, and then using the overflow content target property and using element binding, we bind this rich text block to this rich text block overflow, and then this rich text block overflow to this final third container. And then you have your final separator and text block that has the copyright information for this fictitious company. So linked text containers are really easy to use and add to your XAML scene, and everything happens for you for free. So once we have this app, the next logical thing that someone might want to do is print it. Did any of you guys go to any of the, there was a printing session earlier today. Did any of you go to it? Sweet. Did you guys catch in the keynote where they showed the new Windows 8 printing experience? OK, so we'll go over all that stuff. So in Windows 8, we've tried to simplify printing for both the end user and for our developers. There's a new print manager object, which is the first place a user goes for invoking printing. We could take a look, actually, the first thing, yeah, let's take a look at that experience. So the first thing that you would want to do if you're a user and you want to invoke printing is swipe in from the right, hit the devices charm, and then up pops the devices charm, and you want to just tap on which printer you want, and you get to the print manager. And the print manager exposes all the capabilities of the printer in terms of whether you want to do portrait or landscape, the number of copies, all that stuff. So once your user knows how to print one Metro-style app, it knows how to print all Metro-style apps. And you want to make your app integrate with this experience. However, that takes a little bit of work. If we go back to our fictitious reader app, without any work, and we swipe in from the right, hit the devices charm, we see that there's no printers exposed. And that's because we haven't done the work to integrate this app with the Windows 8 printing charm. So let's quickly look at what that takes to do, what it takes to do that. The first thing you need to do is register for printing. And registering for printing simply tells Windows that, hey, my app knows how to print in Windows 8. So when the user swipes in from the right and hits the devices charm, Windows 8 will show all the printers that are available to that printer. And you should do this in your app at startup. The next step is printing initialization. And printing initialization simply gives Windows a little bit of information about the print job that you're about to execute. And this happens when the user has actually swiped in and hit the devices charm and is ready to start the printing process. After printing initialization, you're called back to paginate your content. So in some cases, this might be as simple as providing your root visual to Windows to print, if you just want to print what's on the screen. However, if you have a more complicated app like a reader, you may want to go through all your content and create different pages out of it. And the pagination step is where you would do this. After you've paginated your content, Windows calls you back to provide a specific print preview page. And this will happen by default when the print manager comes up, because the print manager will show the first print preview page, or it might happen 3 or 4 times in a row if the user clicks next and wants to preview all of the pages. It's also important to note that you may go back to pagination after you've created your print preview pages and given Windows a couple of them, because the user may preview the first 5 pages and decide that they'd rather do landscape instead of portrait. So you'll go back to pagination, and Windows will tell you how the settings have changed and give you a chance to repaginate your content. Once the user's happy with how the content's paginated, they hit the print button, and then Windows asks you for the final print pages to print and send to the printer. So that's a simple overview of how you print an application in Windows 8 XAML. And we'll now take a look at the code to do this, because we made it really simple for you to do this. The first step is registering for printing. And you could do this in the constructor for your main page or wherever you like, and we suggest you do it at startup. The first thing to do is to get the print manager, the current instance of the print manager. And the print manager is this new object in Windows 8 that simplifies printing for both you, the developer, and as well as the user. On that print manager, you register a callback for when the user initiates printing. And once the user initiates printing, you need to initialize your print job. After that, you get a print document. Now, it's important to note that this print document is a XAML-specific construct. And we've added this to our framework to help you with the process of printing. The print manager, its native language for visuals and things like that is D2D. However, you as XAML developers don't have any D2D objects. You have UI elements and controls and things like that. So the print document will take a UI element and then convert it for you into D2D calls and give it straight to Windows. So there's nothing that you have to do. You can give it the native objects that you're used to working with, and then the XAML framework will convert that into a language that Windows knows how to deal with. So once you have your print document, you want to register a few callbacks on it. The first one is the callback that you use to create preview pages. This is when you paginate your content. Then add a handler to provide a preview page to Windows when the user asks to see a specific page. And finally, add a handler to provide all the pages to Windows when the user is ready to actually print their document. Finally, save the document source. So if you see here, this step is registering for printing, which is the first of 5 steps. And the other 4 steps, which is initialization, pagination, providing a preview page, and providing the final print pages, are all handled by event callbacks that you register when you register for printing. On to the second step, which is printing initialization. Here's our event handler that we registered for to be called when a print job is started. And you simply initialize a print task. You could also do any other initialization that your app needs to do for printing. So in this example, I'm just creating a list of UI elements, and each of these UI elements represents one page. So I now have a place where I can create a list of preview pages so that they're cached and I can maintain them. But each app is free to do whatever they want for printing and this background stuff. The next step, which is paginating your content, is also left up to the application. So you could provide the root visual like I mentioned earlier. You could paginate your own content however you see fit. So in this example, just have a simple loop, which while I haven't created all my preview pages, I call some function that I've created which adds one preview page to my cache of pages. But this is left up to you, the developer. The one thing that you do have to do during the pagination process is tell Windows how many preview pages you ended up creating so that they can expose this to the user. The next step of providing a preview page is super simple. In the event handler, you just get one of the preview pages and provide it to Windows and tell it which preview page it is. So there's a get preview page event args, and in that it will tell you which preview page the user has asked for. Find that wherever you're saving your preview pages and pass it back to the print document. The print document will take care of converting that UI element into D2D calls for you. The final step, provide preview pages, is pretty much as simple as the last step, where you just give Windows all of your preview pages. There you go. And the one thing to note about this is that you need to add these preview pages in order. So start with your first preview page, and then send all of them to Windows. And finally tell Windows that you're done giving preview pages to them so they can start the print job. So, I've taken the sample reader that you saw and added pretty much that code to it so that when we swipe in from the right and then hit the devices charm, we now see fax. Since I don't have a printer connected, you don't see the printer, but you would if we had printers connected to this device. And when I hit fax, you go into the print preview mode for Print Manager. A few things to note is that I've done a little bit more work than just the code that I showed you. The first thing is I converted the whole scene to be white background and black text instead of black background and white text because we don't want to spend all of our toner printing that. And I've also responded to a few events like orientation change. So when I was first called to paginate, Windows told me to paginate my content in portrait mode. However, if the user chooses to change the orientation, I'm called back to repaginate my content, and the setting for orientation has changed, and I've responded to that in the layout that I chose to create for my application. Let's quickly take a look to see that it's really that simple. And all the code that I'm about to show you should look very similar to the PowerPoint, the code in the PowerPoint. So here we're in the constructor of a main page. And like in the PowerPoint, I get the print manager, add a handler for printing initialization, create a print document to help me print, then add 3 other handlers to do pagination, provide a preview page, and provide the final print pages to Windows. In the handler for initializing the print task, I create my list of UI elements and initialize the print task. In my pagination handler, I clear my list of preview pages. I then query the settings sent to me by the print manager to see if my orientation is portrait or otherwise. I just otherwise assume it's landscape and don't deal with the multitude of orientations that are exposed in Windows 8. And then call a function which is add preview page to cache. And that's just a private function in which I look at the orientation, and if it's portrait, I add 2 columns, 2-column linked text container layout, or if it's landscape, I add a 3-column linked text container layout and switch the background and foreground colors and add that page to my cache of preview pages. And then I set the page count by getting the count from the cache of preview pages. In get preview page, I simply retrieve the preview page that was asked for. And then in add pages, I iterate over my cache of pages, give them to Windows, and then tell them that I've added all the pages and adding pages is complete so that they can go on and print the document. And that's all the code there is to printing a XAML app. Thank you. I think that's my team members back there. Alner's promoting his own feature. So in review, we've added a lot of great features to the Windows 8 XAML tech stack. That includes things like spell checking, text prediction, linked text containers, clear text button, show reveal password button, and many more. All these text controls have been improved to make touch a first-class experience for you, the developer. You don't have to do anything. You get these for free right out of the box. And for end users, these have been developed to be quick, intuitive, and fit right in with the Windows 8 touch language. Finally, printing your app through the unified Windows 8 printing experience is simple. Windows 8 itself has done a lot to simplify the printing experience for users as well as developers. And then the XAML framework has then gone farther and tried to make that even easier so that it's XAML specific. There's a few related sessions that you can go see, like apps that print. That was a session by John Kay earlier today. Or creating Metro-style apps quickly with built-in controls. Paul Gus gave that talk yesterday. Joe gave a talk about the basics of XAML. And there's a lot of other great sessions that you could watch for more information on XAML and printing. Finally, go to the blog, give us feedback, tell us what you like, Tell us what you don't like. Tell us things that you think we can improve on. Because at the end of the day, that's our job, is to provide a platform for you which enables your creativity as easily as possible. Thanks for coming out, and we have a fair amount of time, so you can either go to Ask the Experts, or come up to the mic, ask questions, or come straight up to, or sweet, he wants to go up right now. So,
is this on?
Is that mic on? Go ahead.
So I saw you put together a page where you flowed the document from one column to another, but it was only a single page.
Yes.
Who controls the pagination across multiple pages from the same rich text content?
You do.
Well, that was a bad answer.
So you're responsible for, there is no automatic page creation for you. You would be responsible for doing that. I actually have slides on my laptop. I was going to go into that in a little more depth. I got feedback that it may be a little more complicated than most people wanted to dive into. So feel free, if you wait around. Excuse me? Okay, we'll take some more questions and then I can show it here if you'd like. That'd be fine too.
Let me ask my other question real quick. Is what's the data format that you're storing the XAML text in?
Okay, so in a text box and a text block, you give it a plain text string.
But the rich text specifically?
So, at Build, we're only talking about things that are in the developer preview.
Yeah.
And there is no rich text control, editable control in this preview. However, as a text PM, I consider that a must-have for shipping. So.
Okay, so what's the source of that then? I mean,
you could, in terms of like, where would you get that content from?
Yeah, if I get content, what format do I have to provide it to display rich text? Is it RTF? Is it HTML?
I would stay tuned to the blog because that control does not exist in the developer preview.
Can I put a big request in that you provide a mechanism that if you're going to do rich text,
yes,
you also put in an automatic conversion to HTML? So that way, when I take and I put my data in my XAML control that's been rich text for years, I can store that data back into my database as HTML and display it in reporting services, kind of bringing that whole thing together.
Yes, you can. We hear that, and please put that on the blogs. I mean, on the
session feedback.
On the session feedback, or just the general Windows feedback. So
okay,
if you guys ask for that, the more likely it is to get in. Out of curiosity, what are the formats that you would like to see? How do you feel about rich text? How do you feel about, obviously you said HTML. What about RTF?
Well, right now we have lots of data in RTF.
Okay.
And we'd like to use reporting services to print that data.
Okay.
But that's just not possible without doing some third-party conversion. So it would be nice to have that built in.
Do you want to save that? Would RTF, for you, would RTF be fine? Would you want to save that as, do you necessarily want to go to HTML?
I don't mind if it's HTML, as long as it's full fidelity. But it has to be somewhat seamless in the conversion. In other words, if I handed an RTF string, convert it to HTML silently in the background.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely scenarios for both.
Yeah.
HTML or RTF, and those are noted.
Thanks.
Of course. We'll go over here next.
Hi. I have a very simple question. So when I look at your text block, the non-editable text block, I really like the font family, the whole, like the typography and how clean and crisp it looks. And I want to create that kind of control today on Windows 7 using XAML. So where can I get the details on the font family, the character size, and so on?
So we use Sego UI Lite, I believe, as the font family by default. If you can send me an email. My email is cstreet@Microsoft. Ask me that question in email, and I can send you back all the specifics. But I believe it's Sego UI Lite at font size 16.
Okay. Will do. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi. Hopefully a couple quick questions about the on-screen keyboard, the software input panel.
Sure.
Is there a notion of input scope in order to shape the keys that appear based on the purpose of the text box?
That is not in the developer preview. That's also a feature that I think is very critical to have, seeing how that's in the HTML framework. In general, we're shooting for parity across the different frameworks, so users get what they expect. Like one app, they can't tell the difference between an HTML app and a XAML app. So it's in HTML. There have been APIs in past XAML frameworks to do that. However, it's not in the developer preview.
Okay. What facilities will we have as developers or will end users have to augment to the dictionary?
Sorry, could you say that again? What about the dictionary?
What facilities will we have to augment dictionary content? You know, if you don't recognize that my last name is a legal value and I'm going to be typing it a lot.
So there's the add to dictionary. When you tap on a misspelled word, there's two options, ignore and add to dictionary. Those are standard in the context menu that pops up. However, there's not an ability to specify your own dictionary. Like in WPF, there were custom dictionaries, which helps you, if you're, say, in a medical or legal industry, not mark words, or say just a chat client like LOL, that will get marked as misspelled unless you specifically choose to add it to the dictionary. Okay,
and the last one I had was, as far as the text prediction is, I imagine you guys have been doing a lot of your usability lab studies and what have you. Can you comment a little bit on what led you to decide to put the text completion all the way up at the text block rather than near the keyboard where your fingers happen to currently be?
So there's two options actually for text prediction. You can tap on the word that shows up, or let's see here. As you type, one of the keys actually changes to an insert button, and so you can just tap that button itself. Let's see if I can't find that for you. So you see how that in the bottom right, it's a green insert button. You can just tap that, and it will do auto completion for you.
Okay, thank you.
Sweet.
Hi. So just to clarify what I think I heard you say, we can't customize like the autocomplete dictionary for a particular text box?
No.
Okay.
Not the developer cannot do that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then one other question, are fixed document, flow document, that stuff from WPF printing right now, is that gone in WinRT?
It is not in text block or rich text block. So yes, it's currently gone.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Most of my question was already asked as far as being able to...
Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think most of my question was already answered about customizing the soft keyboard, but I did also have a question if one wanted to create a custom text control. If there's not an ability to signal the need for the soft keyboard to appear, how would that work?
Why do you want to create a custom text control?
That's a good question.
Because
I mean,
text is a very complicated. Like, have you ever created a text control before?
No, but so imagine maybe an application where you are learning a new language, for example, and there are maybe specific text functions that aren't part of, sort of normal text input. I think there are certain applications where somebody might want to do that, and I understand why you would not want developers to be sort of hiding and showing the soft keyboard, manually, but there's got to be a way to do it somehow.
It's really hard to, not that you're not a smart developer and it can be done, it's very painful to create a text control, especially when you deal with English text, that's one thing, and then if you want to internationalize it, that's a whole different story. Our advice is don't create your own text controls, basically, because you won't get integration. Well, you'll have to do a lot of extra work to get integration with the soft keyboard. You'll have to create your own selection. So you'll basically have to model, we would like you to model our text selection model so that users know how to select text in your app. And that's not, you can do it, but it's not straightforward.
I'm understanding that it's very difficult. I just want to know, is it possible or not?
It's possible. I would say it's almost impossible to do, but you guys come up with ways to do these things all the time. So, I mean, it's code. You can do it. It's just, it's going to be painful. It'll be very painful.
Okay.
Won't the tool vendors do this anyway?
Excuse me?
Won't the tool vendors do it anyways?
So the question was, will the tool vendors do it? Why would the tool vendors do it?
They create new controls all the time.
I am not aware of any new text controls. They may put Chrome around. So you may take a text box, let's use this example. Say our text box had rich text formatting capabilities. You may take that text box and add Chrome around it that allows you to do things like bold and italic. And that's definitely very possible to do. However, that's different than creating a text control that's responsible for doing text layout. So you can definitely enhance our text controls, and we would love for you guys to do that. But the actual line layout and word breaking and complex scripts, so getting Arabic characters to connect correctly or change based on what characters are to the left or to the right of them, that's the stuff that we would prefer you guys don't do and use our inbox text controls for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, just to add to that, in our current app, we have a pretty sophisticated text layout system I'll talk to you about.
Yep.
We're actually seriously thinking of building our own text input control right now because users want to copy and paste text from our layout system and place it into a rich editing environment, and the rich text box isn't sufficient for our needs. So that is actually something we're seriously considering doing.
Yes, people do it. I believe you were using WPF,
Yeah,
correct?
we were.
WPF exposes a text formatter property, and that's what our text controls are built with, is text formatter under the covers. And so WPF was a rich language that exposed that functionality. That's not exposed currently in Windows 8 XAML. So it would be a lot harder for you to create your own text control,
Right.
unless that gets exposed for you.
Could you just speak briefly about async and printing? Are those event handlers called on the UI thread? What if they need to take a long time to run? How does that work?
So for printing or for just in general?
For printing.
So we have our printing PM here. I'll take a first stab at it if you want to come up, Owner. He can also answer that better. The four printing steps: initialization, pagination, providing preview pages, and providing final pages are all done in handlers, and you could do that async if you want. All what I did was synchronous, but Owner can give a more in-depth answer.
Yeah, so can you just repeat the question for me one more time, please? Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I was just wondering if the event handlers for creating a preview page run on the UI thread, and if they take a long time, how would you integrate that with async?
Yeah, so you can delegate to a background thread. I'm not exactly sure what the class is, but I do know that we have an ability to run that off on a spin up a worker thread, basically, to do that work.
And this worker thread is not suspended if the application goes out of...
Sorry, say that one more time?
Yes, if you are printing in background and you're leaving the application and you go to another application, we heard in the keynote that after about 5 seconds your application suspends.
Yes.
What about the worker thread you're
I believe
on?
it also suspends. All your threads will suspend.
Yeah, so background printing is somewhat a problem then.
Yeah, that's a good. I think we're aware of that. I think when I talked to one of the architects, that's an issue that's come up. We've heard that a few times. So we'll definitely look into that and see how we can handle it.
On WPF, there were a bunch of properties on text block for, different kind of text formatting options and text rendering options. And you could control what anti-aliasing was done and stuff like that. And I heard at a different talk that the Metro stuff doesn't use ClearType anymore. It uses grayscale anti-aliasing. I was just wondering if you could speak a little about that stuff.
Yes, we do use grayscale. We use grayscale sub-pixel rendering. In past frameworks, there has been sort of a debate about, do we do subpixel, do we do ClearType, things like that. Windows Phone uses grayscale subpixel. So as these devices get higher and higher DPIs, the text looks better and better. However, Windows 8 runs on a plethora of devices. So if you guys see issues, please give us feedback. That's how all of our other tech stacks have evolved, is through customer feedback. So In the developer preview build, there are some bugs around text clarity where it's not as clear as it should be. So when you're evaluating text clarity, look at a equivalent HTML5 application, because we all use dwrite under the covers. So our rendering should be the same between the two. So if you think the text clarity in a HTML5 application, Metro style application is good, then that's what we should have in XAML as well, and vice versa.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I guess he's over there.
Yeah. I have a question regarding printing. We've seen in your demo that you use the charms.
Yes.
And opening the charms allows you or gives you access to the properties of the printing device, like portrait orientation, these kind of things. But in some cases, you need, when you print, access to properties of the document. I'm referring to the print dialog in Word, for instance, where you can choose to print page 3 to 5 or print selected text. Is it possible to extend the charm with these kind of properties, or should you do it in another way?
I believe that's built into the print manager, but
Yeah, so that modern print dialog that you see, it should all be built in there. I'm not sure about custom range printing, at least for the developer preview. I think that's something that we're looking to add. But in terms of what you saw in Word, in terms of the layout, orientation, all that type of stuff, I believe you can also do that in this modern print dialog. Now, you mentioned the text selection piece of it. You should be able to also do custom print properties. So you can actually have a drop-down where, let's say you have a big map scenario, and you have directions and you have a map. And maybe you want to provide a drop-down and say, hey, I only want directions. I want directions and map. I just want the map. You have that ability. You will have that ability. Currently in the Windows preview, you don't, but it's something that we are looking to add.
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, pretty much related to the previous question, the clear type.
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit, please?
Yeah, pretty much related to the previous question regarding clear type hints that we had, right? So, are there still options for text options for clear type hints, or that doesn't exist?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of that. Is there a text
in
option
WPF,
for what?
yeah, we had clear type hints, right?
Yes.
As text options.
No, because our rendering stack should take care of that for you. We've done a lot of work in the rendering stack, and so the API you referred to was more around like when text gets animated, I believe. Like, are you talking about text animation hint?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was around when text starts moving around the screen, and there's been a lot of work in our rendering stack to make sure that that text remains clear.
Okay, so I mean, are we still talking about the device-independent units there now on the screen, or are we expressing the?
They should be device-independent, I believe.
They should be, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So in your printing sample, I noticed that the only printer that was there was the fax printer.
Yes.
Where is XPS in all of these things? What's changed with XPS?
I'm not sure.
So under the covers, we actually use XPS. I'm not sure why it wasn't in that dialog. I know that I've seen actually on my laptop print to OneNote and things like that. I haven't seen XPS, but I can definitely talk to the PM, John Kay, and kind of get that answer for you if you want to give me your contact information after.
Just one question about the asynchronous printing experience. Doesn't those XAML objects has thread affinity? So if I create XAML objects on the UI thread, and I want to print on the background thread, then can I use the already created XAML objects in the background center or not? Or
so I'm not sure if you can pass the UI elements. Well, I know that when you can do your pagination on a background worker thread for sure. And once you've completed, you can then get back to the UI thread and make the call to the print manager where the add, I think it was add print pages on the UI thread. I'm not sure if you can make those calls on the worker thread. But you can definitely do the pagination, figure out how many pages you have, and do all that work on a background thread. And when you get your result, then make the call in the UI thread.
okay, thank
Okay, so for those of you who would like to see some ideas about creating multiple pages, feel free to stay and we'll go over some slides. For everyone else, thanks for coming. So the problem, oh, sweet, that's cool. Are you gonna leave it on? Okay, cool. So the problem that we're trying to solve is we have a lot of text. We want to lay it out across multiple pages. How do we do that? So the first thing is you create your page to be however big you want. And then if this slide doesn't work. Sweet. Okay, so if this is the first page, we know we're going to be doing this with linked text containers. So we add a rich text block because rich text blocks always start chains of linked text containers. And then fill out the page as we want. This is just a simple 3-column layout. You could put them wherever you want. Text would flow there. Wrap it around an image, however you please. And if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me as we go. Yes, because depending on what object that is, if it's a canvas, that has variable size, but if it's a grid, it should be. Okay, so I was talking about in general layout. He was asking, is the page size available to you when we're doing this? And in specific for printing. And yes, it is. There's, on that same object that I got the orientation from, it gives you a print size. There's a couple different sizes that you can use to determine how big that area is. So then you lay out your rich text block overflows. Where it gets tricky is if this is not the first page. So if this is not the first page, the first link container on the page that we're creating needs to be a rich text block overflow. However, you need to have kept a pointer to the last rich text block you added, and then link that rich text block to the rich text block overflow to the first rich text block overflow that you added to this page. And so that's what I tried to get through with this picture is that you add that first rich text block overflow and then link it to the page before that. So they could be in the visual tree depending on where you put them. So if you add them to the children collection, say that page is a grid. If you add them to the children collection of the grid, they don't go anywhere. They still remain in the tree. They might not be visible, but they're still in the tree. Collapsing, if you collapse it, it doesn't measure that content, I believe. But put it in the visual tree. I have a little reader app that I'm playing with, and I actually end up just leaving it wherever it is and then applying a render transform to like 1,000,000 or something, so it's just somewhere really far off screen. So the question is, does page N have to have the rich text block overflow from all the previous pages? Right. You got 3 on screen here, but also the 3 before that and the 3 before that. Well, this first rich text block overflow that we added to this page doesn't need to know about all of them. It just needs to know about the last one that it was linked to. But all those other things need to be in the visual tree somewhere. So as I mentioned, you could render transform them off screen somewhere. They're all there. You just need to link it to the one right before it. And text will continue to flow through this chain. The question was, do you scale to 1,000 pages? Yeah. In theory, it would be the same as placing that text in a rich text block. I have not tried that. It should be no slower than basically laying out all that text because we still need to measure it to know where it goes. But it's not like there's a large cost to linking a container. You just measure all the text once. You just remember where this container stopped rendering text and then pick up in another one. So there's a slight overhead for it, but there's not a large cost to using linked text containers. It's basically the same cost as, it should be the same order of magnitude as laying out that much text anyway. Does that answer your question? It will be in the memory, yes. Yeah, if you're printing a huge file, it's going to be around somewhere. So yes, you can get, how familiar are you with the XAML? So his question is, can I figure out, there's the has extra content property, which tells you whether there's extra content, but can I figure out where exactly in the content I am at for this container? And the answer is yes. If you've used past XAML frameworks, there's the idea of content start and content end, and that gives you a text pointer. So you can query content start. Content start points to the start of the content for this element, and content end points to the end of the content for this element. So whatever's rendered by a rich text block or a rich text block overflow. And then you can use those text pointers to walk the content or do whatever else you please. Yes, you can do that. There you go. See, that's what's great about developers. They always figure out other ways to do things. And then yeah, you just keep adding these rich text block overflows, and then repeat if the last one that you added to a page has extra content. So that's one way of doing it, or we could do it the way you suggested. Pseudocode for this is basically to create a preview page, you look at the orientation of it, and then while the last rich text block overflow that's been added to the overall has content, continue this process, and then I add one page, and adding one page basically creates a page and returns the last rich text block overflow that we added to that page, so we can tell if it has extra content, and adds that page to the cache of pages. If you look at the code for add one page, we basically create a grid and then create X columns based on the orientation. If we pass in a rich text block overflow, and we do that right, so we can check right here. So if the rich text block overflow that was passed in is null, then we know that this is the first page. So we create a rich text block as opposed to a rich text block overflow. And then if this is not the first page, we know we need to link the rich text block overflow that we're about to add to the page to the one before it. So basically, we assign it to the overflow content target property, and then add the rich text block overflow element. Oh, that doesn't work well with PowerPoint. Sorry about that. We add that rich text block overflow to the grid, and then return that last one out of the function so that we can keep powering our loop to go around until the last rich text block overflow element doesn't have any more content, so we know that there's no more pages to create. Oh, and I just walked through that. We just walked through that, and that's what these highlights do, just to say, we're creating the grid now. We see how many columns we're creating. Check to see if this is the first thing. If it is the first thing, add a rich text block. If it's not, add a rich text block overflow. If we check to see if we need to do linking. If we do link the thing up, add the rich text block overflow to the page. And remember that this is the last one you added, so that when you follow out the loop, you can return the last rich text block overflow that you added to the function before to keep powering that while loop. And then finally, whenever you're paginating content, remember to tell Windows how many pages you actually created. So those are slides that, through various iterations of this talk, got cut, but for you guys, it was interesting. So thanks, guys. I'm 4 minutes over. Go to Ask the Experts. Enjoy the rest of the time at Build, and thanks a lot.